So, American and South Korean officials and veterans will commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement in the U.S. and South Korea this week. Now, signed on July 27, 1953, the ceasefire agreement brought the brutal three-year conflict to an end.
The Armistice Agreement created the Demilitarized Zone that served as a buffer zone and de facto border between South and North Korea. How have the two states evolved since then, and where do we stand now in terms of our relations? Joining us live to give us some perspective is Dr. Jang-ho, Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for National Unification. Dr. Kim, thank you for joining us again.
Well, it's great to be back.
All right, Dr. Kim, let's start by discussing inter-Korean relations. I mean, where we stand today, 6 decades since the end of the conflict. First, the military equation, now 6 years after the Korean War Armistice.
Well, contrary to what we want to believe or what the popular public opinion is, we do not have an overwhelming edge over North Korea's conventional forces, unfortunately. Army, that is the land forces. In fact, North Korea has the edge in that field. Primarily down to their numerical advantage in terms of infantry, as well as tanks, artillery, things like this. In terms of our naval forces, I think we're about even. They have the advantage in numerical numbers, yet we have ships that are better equipped, a little bit more technologically advanced. Where we do have an advantage is in our Air Force, where our fighter aircrafts would immediately, I think, if hostilities broke out, would be able to take control of the air.
And taking control of the air is very important these days. You usually don't have to stay in land. You fly over the war zone and kind of take care of business along the way. So I guess that gives us somewhat of a positive advantage there. Moving on to a different story, what about the economic paths that the two states have taken? In terms of relations economically, we were just giving and giving and giving, and finally we have something going on with the joint industrial complex, but we still don't know what the future holds for that at the moment.
Well, I think as for the economic paths that these two, we and North Korea have taken during the past 60 years, the outcome is obvious. I think we are a legitimate part of the international community, thriving economically, doing well, whereas North Korea, the 20-some-odd million people, are suffering due to the incapabilities of the Kim regime in terms of the economic policies. As for Kaesong, I think we saw today that our government is pretty much running out of patience, that we, without a guarantee of this happening again, that is dramatic shutting off of the area entirely, unilaterally by North Korea. Unless there is a mechanism to prevent this from happening again, I think our government is inclined not to continue.
All right, we'll have to wait and see how that develops on the Kaesong front. Now, 60 years ago, we were at the height of the Cold War. Of course, that's no longer the case. The geopolitical and diplomatic environment have gone through a huge change. But would you say the situation is completely different from back then, or would you say it's more of the same, however, just in different intensity?
It's both different and same at the same time, because it's different in the sense that we now, commensurate to our economic strength, our place in the world, we are able to exercise diplomacy that shape our future, whereas in 60 years ago we did not have that. North Korea is an isolated country that's isolated from the international community. They're running out of resources, whatnot. So in that equation, I think we have the upper hand in terms of diplomatic leverage and activities concerning our diplomacy. But I think it's still the same in that we're still divided, and we still work in an environment that's what we experts call a bipolar structure. That is the maritime powers led primarily by the United States, and the continental powers led primarily during the Cold War by the Soviet Union, of course, now by China. And China supporting North Korea, and we being supported by the United States through our alliance. So structurally, there isn't much difference. But I think that we are now capable of shaping that structure to a certain degree in our favor.
Now, can we focus a little bit on the ROK US or the U.S. Korea, South Korea alliance in terms of military power? We did hear a lot of stories coming up about OPCON transfer and, of course, the cost sharing. So maybe some people outside might be concerned if this relationship or this solid alliance might be relatively weaker than before. What's your take on that?
I think, on the contrary, in terms of its political foundations, it's really stronger than ever. Remember, this Korean War started 63 years ago, primarily because, well, I guess in part because we did not have an alliance with the United States. In fact, in early 1950, Dean Acheson, then the Secretary of the United States, declared the Korean Peninsula to be outside the United States defense perimeter, which included Japan, excluded South Korea. And I'm sure this played into the calculation that Kim Il-sung was making in his so-called effort to liberalize South Korea from the imperial forces of the United States.
According to him.
According to him. So the United States, our alliance with the United States is still certainly needed in that sense. And also with the equation, with what the North Korean nuclear threat brings into the equation, I think we still need the United States, in fact, more than ever in terms of that nuclear deterrence that provides the peace of mind to continue on our way of life here in South Korea.
So the RK-US alliance being very strong today, and that it is actually quite needed where we stand today as well. Now let's talk about the way July 27th, the day of the Korean War Armistice, is celebrated between the two Koreas. It's very much perceived differently. How is that possible? Where does this difference in perspective come from?
Yeah, it's ironic that we're both, they in North Korea and we here in South Korea, are celebrating the date of the armistice 60 years on. And this is primarily down to the different perception or the false perception that I think that they have. They believe that they repel the Americans, that number one, they believe that South Korea started the Korean War, or the American puppets, according to them, led by, of course, Lee Seung-man, our president back then. And that they were, along with the Chinese, able to repel the expansionistic tendencies of U.S. imperialism. So thus, we have Chinese officials visiting North Korea, joining North Korea for that festivity. And on the other hand, in South Korea, elsewhere in the world, I don't think we're only celebrating, but we're paying tribute to those who fought in the cause to make that, well, make the platform on which South Korea today is possible. How laying the foundations for the political and the economic development that we have achieved in the past 60 years, paying tribute to those who have particularly given their lives for that effort. Mm-hmm. I think the world has now moved on from the days of the Cold War to see that it really was a war to prevent communism from spreading and giving South Korea an opportunity to take part in the world that we know today.
Okay, in terms of the security situation on the Korean Peninsula, what lies ahead? What are some of the biggest homeworks for the Park Geun-hye administration?
Well, as I said, I think we still live in a bipolar structured international environment, and thus our alliance with the United States is perennially still important. And I think she's managing that well, of course, as did the previous administration of Lee Myung-bak. I think what she needs to do now is to convince China in our effort to denuclearize North Korea. And I think she did a good job in laying the foundations for that in her recent visit to China. And I hope she can continue on that path in convincing. It will be a very tiring, strenuous effort, because China still thinks of North Korea as a strategic buffer, strategic asset that will help them in their competition with the United States. We need to convince China that that's not the case. And I think she's striking a good balance in between our efforts towards the United States as well as China.
So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's a sad fact that the situation is no more less complicated now than it was 60 years ago. But it is on a positive note. We have moved on from that era, and we hope for a better future together. All right, Dr. Kim Jang-ho, Research Fellow at Korea Institute for National Unification. Thank you for today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.